So today on Radio Free History, we are going to pull back the curtain on money. Spoilers, it's not a bunch of Jews. There's actually some very important institutions and some innovations there. Hopefully you enjoy the podcast.
Every conspiracy theorist and conservative uncle likes to talk about the Fed, the money supply, the big banks, the hedge fund managers, the Jews, BlackRock, the World Economic Forum. But even if they're onto something, nobody seems to be able to explain how money works. Maybe the opacity is an issue in and of itself, but it's also not a sound argument to say, I don't understand this, therefore it needs to be changed. Here's an example. Everybody knows that since the pandemic, inflation has been out of control. It cost me $12 for a bottle of honey at the supermarket last week, so something is really off here. But the meme among people on the internet is money printer go burr. Now, our society is essentially cashless. I haven't had a $20 bill in my pocket for about 4 months. Yes, there are still bills and banknotes in circulation, but there really weren't that many bills coming out of the printing press. Nobody uses bills for transactions anymore. So something clearly happened.
Money printer don't go burr?
Yeah, the money printer was not going burr.
Why would memes lie to me?
Well,
that's why we're doing this podcast.
This is exactly why we're doing this. It is an issue that people really don't understand how this works.
People don't understand how people make roads. Like if you just took a random group of people and said, good luck, you got to build a road here, they wouldn't know. They'd be beating each other up with the tools you gave them.
Yeah.
So when you get to something a little bit complicated like money, I'm not shocked at all.
Yeah.
That there's some issues there in terms of the middle mass of the bell curve not understanding this.
Well, when you think about it, it doesn't even make any logical sense. So much money was created in the last few years, especially during the pandemic, that the money printer couldn't physically produce that amount of paper. It would have to run 24/7 for a period of several years just to get trillions of dollars into circulation. And there was trillions of dollars injected into the money system.
Jesus Christ. For anybody who doesn't know, the money is only as good as what you can buy with it. And when they were doing all this shit, production actually dropped. So now you had all this money chasing less goods.
Yeah.
So guess what happens?
So if the money printer go burr meme is just adding confusion, let's try to answer two questions. The first is, in general, what exactly is money? And in specific, what exactly is a US dollar or a Canadian dollar or a British pound or a euro or a Russian ruble or a Malaysian ringgit or whatever? Because until we can answer those two questions, how will we truly know why prices are going up? We can talk in abstract terms like more money going after fewer goods, but if we don't really know what money is, how are we going to come up with a solution for that?
Well, that's a very good point. The democracy is only as good as the intelligence of the electorate. So, if we don't understand this stuff, we can't make decisions about it, and we're in a big black hole.
Well, if
fucking honey costs $12.
If you think that democracy depends on the knowledge and emotion of the people involved, what do you find out about the financial markets?
Oh, Jesus. It's already something that brings up so much passion. When I was bouncing, I worked for a Semitic gentleman who ran bar mitzvahs, and we negotiated a salary, and then a few years later I took on more responsibilities, but the salary didn't go up. So I went and had to negotiate a salary increase, and firstly he was very upset when I understood inflation. That was like, who told you about that? And then he actually cried real tears before raising my salary in line with the inflation he had. So it's already very passionate. There's people who don't want you to know this stuff, namely your employers.
Yes.
And that's why we're going to try to get to the bottom of this.
Well, don't you always cry when your subordinates want to make the same amount in real terms?
Yeah, I'm sure.
I'm going to be jumping around a little bit between historical stories and hypotheticals here, because if I'm going to be explaining how the money system and a bank works, it helps with concrete examples, or at least easy to understand examples. So I'm going to paint a picture of some frontier town in the mid to late 19th century where the next town over is hundreds of miles away and the local economy is largely based on gold and silver coins.
Okay, so I have dysentery.
Mm-hmm.
And okay, continue. So.
Yeah, I think half the people listening to this are going to be a little too young to get the Oregon Trail references.
It's okay.
No, it's okay. I blame them for not being cultured. It's not our fault. So the reason we're just going to coming back to this frontier town picture is just because it strips everything away. There's one or two small banks in town which either have gold coins in the vault or have a few contracts which will be claims on these hard metal assets. The modern banking system is a lot more complicated than this, but at the bottom level, it's not that different. So hopefully by keeping going back to our little small town in the Wild West, I'm hoping it makes things a little bit clearer. I'll start with the first example. Let's say I run the general store in this town and I have 100 gold coins in my safe. You need to buy food for the night, and let's say your grocery bill comes to one gold coin, however many dollars that is. Well, let's not even talk about dollars. Let's just talk about gold and silver coins. There's a problem though. It's 8 p.m. and the bank is closed.
God damn it.
So, and you just don't seem to have any gold coins in your pocket. So what do? What would you do in this case if your family needs to eat, or you're hungry, you want an overnight snack? I don't know, whatever for whatever reason you need to buy stuff from my store. It's a small town, everybody knows everybody else. So can you think of a solution for this?
I'm going to assume I'm not a drifter,
and I
can't just kick in the back door somewhere and get one.
Well, hold that thought. We'll actually be getting to We'll be getting to where the level of trust in the population makes a difference here, but let's just assume everything is above board.
Now, let's say, could I go to the general store owner and say, look, I've got gold in the bank.
Yes.
Can you give me the goods I need now, and I'll give you the gold when the bank opens?
Yeah, that's absolutely a perfect way of looking at it. Really, if we want to make it formal, you would give the store owner an IOU.
Yeah, so I write a piece of paper, you get my gold coin when the bank opens.
Now, an IOU is a piece of paper that has a few things. The first is it has a nominal value on it, in this case, one gold coin. It has the debtor, in which case it would be your signature on it. And it usually says something along the lines of this entitles the general store owner or the bearer to one gold coin. Those words "or the bearer" is important because an IOU can usually be given to somebody else. So let's say you give the store owner an IOU, say, look, I'm sorry, I just don't have any money in my pocket right now. I'm good for it. We are part of the same bowling league or whatever they did in
part of the same ethnic group.
Yeah,
you can trust me.
You would give the store owner an IOU for one gold coin, and the next day you'd come back, say, look, I'm very sorry, here's your gold coin, and end of transaction. The guy would tear up the IOU. So this is a fairly simple credit transaction. We're not going over anything all that fancy yet. But now let's say that the store owner's wholesaler, his supplier, comes in to restock his shelves. We will talk later on about sketchy characters. For now, let's just assume there's no fuckery going on. Everybody is just a completely honest person in this town, or at least the three people involved in this story are honest people.
They're all Puritans from the Northeast.
They're more likely to be like German immigrants or something.
Okay,
but yes,
these are all guys. They got a good banking system. They want to
they do
that back home. So the Goldbergs are
the Goldbergs don't come in till like the Ellis Island wave of immigration.
That's fair. I'm gonna say
or they're the
Ludwig and his buddies. They're not the Secretary of State for the Confederacy, Judah Benjamin. They're not that guy. That again. Well, we'll get to that story in a future podcast. Guys, be very careful. No one tell BLM about this, okay? We got enough Kanyes running around.
Yeah.
We don't need that getting to the wrong group of Twitter people. So everybody listening, be responsible. Don't tell anyone that there were Jews involved in the Confederacy.
Not just involved in the Confederacy, like at the cabinet of the Confederacy. Yes.
Anyway, moving on.
Let's say that the guy comes along with the next shipment of goods, and the bill or the invoice is for 101 gold coins. And I said earlier, I have 100 gold coins in the safe, or the store owner has 100 gold coins in the safe. Well, the store owner has 100 gold coins and this perfectly good IOU that says it's worth 1 gold coin. So maybe the store owner can give the supplier the 100 gold coins and the IOU. And the next day, instead of you coming to me with the gold coin, this guy can meet up with you. You guys can settle up. He holds the IOU, but once you give him the gold coin, he tears up the IOU, and everybody's happy.
Yeah,
We're still following here?
Yeah, I'm still following.
So here we come to a very important question. Is this IOU money? The store owner received it. The store owner used it to settle a debt or to settle a transaction. The economy kept going. Is this IOU money? And more importantly, if it is, did we just create money in this process?
I would say yes, it's money.
Okay.
Did we create money in the process? I guess it would depend on the trust you had in the guy to pay his gold back. Maybe I don't know.
Well, this is the thing that a lot of people don't quite understand. And I would say, yes, it is money as well. It's a little bit of a trick question because we haven't defined what money is. The key here is that in you writing me this IOU, it's not like we added gold to the gold supply. We added the equivalent of +1 gold supply to the IOU owner or to the IOU bearer, and you essentially got a -1.
So there's still the same amount of gold floating around.
Yeah, if we were to add up everybody's net worth, or at least everybody's cash and equivalent balances, it would still add up to the same thing it did before.
Okay.
Adding a plus somewhere and adding an equivalent minus somewhere doesn't change the whole amount.
You're balancing the equation.
Exactly.
The long and the short of it. Okay.
Yeah. Is this IOU money? I would argue yes, it is as well. But again, it's a kind of a trick question at this point because we haven't defined it. But the important thing is we're not just conjuring something up out of nowhere. We're creating a +1 and a -1, and we're not creating anything net in the economy. Your debt still needs to be paid at some point. Now, going back to your hypothetical about the drifter, though, let's say there's a guy named Alvin the Alcoholic, and he wants a gold coin worth of whiskey that night. Let's also say that Alvin the Alcoholic has a history of running up bad debts at the local saloon and getting belligerent when he is confronted about it. Let's say Alvin has some Cherokee blood or something.
There's some disadvantage there for poor Alvin. Systemic oppression.
Yep. Real systemic oppression. Not like 1/16 systemic oppression.
So back to Alvin.
Back to Alvin the Alcoholic. Now, I know there's a chance I'm going to have to hunt him down if I accept one of his IOUs.
You got to get a posse together.
Yes, it might be a pain in the ass. So I can either say, no, I don't accept your IOU, or, business is business. I can say, look, I need cash on the barrel. I need you to pay me the gold now. Or I can say, you can have the whiskey, but I want an IOU that's 1 gold coin and 3 silver coins. Let's say the metallic exchange rate is a point where that's about $1.25.
I'm taking some risk with you, Alvin.
Exactly.
And I'm going to need something to offset my risk.
Well, that's just...
So you got to pay me more.
Exactly.
All right.
So if he comes back the next day and let's just say Alvin Alcoholic in a moment of sobriety just says, look, thank you for the whiskey last night. Here's the 1 gold coin and 3 silver coins. Thank you for letting me do that. Have we created more money based on the fact that we're dealing with a degenerate alcoholic? Something doesn't seem right about this. And this is one of the challenges we're gonna get to with this conversation.
Guessing... that's really difficult.
Yeah.
I would say yes, but we created less good money. We created riskier money. Is that
so?
Makes sense?
Yeah, that's not a bad answer. So this just tells us why we need to have a proper definition of what money is. Because whatever it is, it just can't be right that we have more money in the system when we have a less trustworthy population than when we have a more trustworthy population. And the issue is that we've made a pretty significant assumption after the fact, which is that he actually did pay up.
Yeah, that's the part. Yeah.
Like, in theory, this IOU is still transferable. I can still give it to my supplier. I said, look, this is Alvin the Alcoholics. Do you trust him? But there is 3 extra silver coins in it if he's good. But there's also the chance that he doesn't pay up. I just say, fuck it, it's not worth my time, or I need to go straighten him up out with the posse, as you said.
Go deal with them.
But I mean, even if I'm dealing with you and you're completely trustworthy, there still is the chance that you get struck by lightning overnight or something.
A heart attack, hit by a car, even if I have the best intentions.
Yeah, there is. Again, I'm not talking about the case where there's bad trust in the system, but there still is just genuine risk that you just can't get rid of.
Yeah.
So the important thing about an IOU is that it might turn out to be a completely useless piece of paper, or it might turn out to be worth the face value that's written on it.
Could be Bitcoin, could be Ethereum.
Well, okay. We can talk about some other. I'm planning on getting over a lot of stuff today. I don't even want to go into whether Bitcoin and Ethereum are actually money. I would say they have some money-like properties, but let's define what money is before we even go into asking whether crypto qualifies as money or not.
You've got the AAA oil.
Yep.
And you've got the shitty stuff with the lead still in it that you buy on the reserves.
Yep. So, ideally, the contract or the IOU will be settled. We can just tear it up and go on with our lives. But let's look at all of the possible ways that that this could resolve itself. The first is that if you give me the IOU, we can do what I mentioned earlier. I can give this IOU to somebody else in a transaction. In this case, the supplier, but doesn't need to be the supplier. It can be anybody else. I can say, look, this person is assuming your risk, and you can settle up with him when it comes time to settle up the IOU. In this case, even though you gave me the IOU, I've completely offloaded the risk onto somebody else. That's one way that this can resolve itself. Who knows whether you're good for the debt or not, but it's not my problem because I've given it to somebody else. The second is that if for some reason I become unconvinced that Alvin the Alcoholic's going to settle his debts, I can go to a third party. And let's change the units to units of dollars here. Not, let's say it's for $100, not for 1 unit of coin. I can go to this third party and say, look, I'll sell this to you for $95 or $90. Or if Alvin's a complete degenerate who is probably not going to pay, I might even give it to him for pennies on the dollar. And this person can go deal with Alvin the Alcoholic in various ways that people who are looking to collect on bad debts deal with their.
I think this is a business in the States.
This is a business in a lot of places. It's a business among certain communities. I think there's a reason that Italian immigrants were known for being very, very good on settling their debts because there were consequences for them not paying.
Yeah, that would be
good on settling their debts.
Say.
The third possible resolution is that I can just, fuck it, this guy is not going to settle his debts with me. It's just not worth my effort to go find a third party to give this to. I also don't want to have the reputation as being the guy who sells loans to loan sharks. Let's just forgive the debts. Let's tear up the IOU, write off $1 or $100 or 1 gold coin off of my net worth and just get on with my life. The fourth is that Alvin the Alcoholic can come to me and say, look, I only have $90, not the full 100 or not the full 100 plus the risk premium. Is it okay if we settle this for 90? I can say, look, that's fine. You're technically are defaulting on your debts, but you have 90, you have most of it. I'll tear up the IOU and I'm just not going to take a debt from you in the future. Or I'll take this debt with you with even more of a risk premium on it than I gave you before. I don't get the full face value of the IOU, but still the transaction's finished. I've agreed to write off whatever the difference is and finished end of issue. I can't go track him down for the rest of it. And the fifth, and this is the important one, is that he comes to me with the $90 and he says, I'm still good for the other $10 or the $10 plus the extra. I promise I'll give this to you, so I'm going to write you another $10 IOU, and I tear up the old $100 IOU and get a new $10 IOU. So this is, again, in essence, we're ending the old transaction, but we're creating a new transaction in its place. The $100 IOU is worthless, but now I have $90 and a $10 IOU. And this is crucial because we're not changing the deal. We're not changing the terms of the old contract. We're tearing up the old one and starting a new contract here. So an IOU is either going to be worth zero or it's going to be worth some fraction of its face value. Ideally, it's full face value. But if the IOU is $100, it's going to be worth some value between 0 and 100. In the original example, is this IOU money? Well, I would say yes, it is, because money, if we define it as anything with perceived potential value, an IOU would satisfy that definition.
Oh, yeah.
But the IOU is not legal tender. Yeah. Not all money is legal tender. What legal tender means is that the government has said that this piece of paper must be accepted in a transaction or to settle a debt, public or private. I mean, public debt means you can use it to pay your taxes. That very much changes things when you put the words legal tender on something, and I'll get to that later on. As far as something with some potential perceived value, yeah, an IOU satisfies that. So I would say that an IOU satisfies the definition of money. But again, as I said before, we're not just creating money out of nowhere. We are creating positive money and negative money doing this, and it still nets out to zero.
Okay.
In the modern parlance, you may have seen on the business news people talking about the M0 money supply, the M1 money supply, the M2 money supply, and I think now there's even an M3 money supply. I'm greatly simplifying things, and the terms M0 and M1 would not have been used in a frontier town. But let's say that the gold and silver, we'll call that M0.
Yep.
That's the base money supply. And we'll say M1 is things like these IOUs, things that are essentially a claim on the hard assets at a future date, or a claim on M0 at a future date. Let's not use the word hard asset because we're going to get to what modern money is. But M1 is a claim on M0, essentially. I am greatly simplifying that, but for the sake of this conversation, M0 is the base money supply, and M1 is something that's derivative on the money supply.
I'm going to go out on a limb. M2 is then derivative of M1?
Let's park that. Okay. It's not a yes or no answer.
Oh, wow.
It's... In theory, it still is always asset liability pairs that are drawn on some asset as collateral, but what assets are collateral? And we're trying to do this for a wider audience, and if we try to get down the rabbit hole of what M1, M2, and M3 are in the modern parlance, I get the feeling we're going to lose a lot of people. So for the sake of this conversation, there's the base money supply, which is gold and silver, that's M0, and there's credit checks on the base money supply, we'll call that M1.
Okay.
And under this definition, the IOUs are absolutely money, even though they might turn out to be useless.
So the M0 is the gold and silver in the bank,
Yep.
or whoever's vault.
Yep.
M1 is the IOUs based on the gold and
Yep.
silver. Okay.
So before we really get into the history of everything, I'm actually going to give you one more example in our small town on the frontier. Let's say we have a guy named Big Ralph. He's the richest man in town. He raises beef cows. And more importantly, he found a gold mine on his property. So this is probably California in the 1850s. He's literally sitting on a stack of coins. because he just needs to take his gold to the mint, and they'll turn it into gold coins if he wants them. Ralph here has enough political sway in the town that he's convinced every other cattle rancher for 50 miles around to only accept gold and not silver.
Okay.
The market exchange rate is 15 silver coins for one gold coin, but since Ralph has a monopoly in the area, he charges 18 silver coins for one gold coin. If a butcher comes to town to market to buy some beef because he wants to sell beef at his butcher shop and he has gold coins already in his pocket, it's no different to him. He just pays for the heads of cattle with his gold coins and takes it back to his butcher shop. But if a butcher shows up in town with only silver coins, because Ralph is telling everybody you need to sell cows and gold, they're going to have to go to Ralph's property, pay him 18 silver coins for a gold coin, and then go to the market or buy cattle directly from Ralph or buy cattle from somebody else. Ralph doesn't care. He's already extorted his 3 silver coins out of you. Gold is locally overvalued, and there's certain implications here that we'll get to later. But let's just say that some hotshot stranger from the city who doesn't understand how things work in this area decides to open a cattle ranch and say, fuck what Ralph thinks. I'm going to start selling cows and silver myself. What's going to happen here? Well, the laws of economics would say that now that somebody's going to take silver, even if none of the other ranchers in town are going to accept silver, they're going to have to lower their prices in gold to compete with this guy. So just by having a second metal in the market, the cattle ranchers have, in a very real sense, lost some of their lost some of their wealth, lost some of the things they can buy with it. So one of the things I want to get across with this conversation is that money is not just something passive around us. We're not just goldfish in water that we don't understand. Money is something active, and we still live in a barter economy. Money is not just a passive medium of exchange. You don't just sell something for gold coins, buy something else with the gold coins you get. While you have gold in your pocket, the value of gold, the real value of gold, can go up and go down. And in this case, just the existence of a separate currency in the town has made all of the ranchers poorer. If Ralph is a little bit unscrupulous, he may get a posse of other ranchers, and this hotshot or this hotshot rancher who wants to sell things in silver may end up hung in the town square.
He was a sodomist.
Yeah, well, here's the thing. I'm actually not talking about gold coins. I'm talking about US dollars. I'm not talking about cattle. I'm talking about barrels of oil. And this hotshot is Saddam Hussein.
Hey!
Which we'll get to a little bit later. This is why I'm talking about things on the frontier town, though, because there's a lot of intrigue that happens in the modern monetary system, but really at the lowest levels, it's no different than people selling gold, trading with gold and silver coins on the frontier.
Okay.
In an MBA class, they would probably tell you money is a medium of exchange. I disagree with this. There is supply and demand for coins, bills, dollars, loans, IOUs, as much as there is for any other good. But the traditional definition of money is that it's a unit of account, it's a medium of exchange, and it's a store of value, or at least a store of perceived value, which is why the IOUs we talked about earlier would still qualify as money. The business school definition of money, if you open up any MBA textbook, will have some combination of these adjectives: available, affordable, durable, fungible, portable, reliable, acceptable, divisible, uniform, or limited in supply. The general idea is that money is something that's uniform enough that me having a $5 bill in my pocket is no different than you having a $5 bill in your pocket. If we were to switch our $5 bills doesn't make either one of us richer or either one of us poorer. It's also important for it to be durable so that if you have to travel a long distance, having money in your pocket, having gold coins in your pocket don't degrade, they don't rust. You can still have just as much value in your pocket after a long journey. You might notice something though, which is that we were talking about inflation early on. Does modern money really satisfy all of these adjectives that I mentioned earlier? And I'm not even saying it doesn't. I'm just saying it's food for thought. It's a question to think about. So we're going to start digging in a little bit to the history of what money is, what was used for money over the centuries, and let's get to a real good idea of what money truly is. Forget the MBA definition. Let's see if we can get a tangible understanding of what money is. And when we're done with that, let's see if we can answer this really pressing question: what exactly is a US dollar in the year 2024? A common historical example of money is some sort of certificate that can be redeemed for a commodity that's stored in a warehouse or a storehouse.
Usually a precious metal, right?
Not always.
It's like salt, spices.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. The important thing is, though, is that it's a commodity. Salt and spices are something that has value to most people in the economy. And
Like oil today.
yeah, exactly. In fact, if you have a bunch of oil in a storage facility, some certificates or checks on oil in that facility would 100% qualify as money.
For anybody who has been indoctrinated by environmentalists, nothing in our society works without oil. The fertilizer that fertilizes the crops that you eat is petroleum based. Industrial lubricants, anything made of plastic is oil based, and of course, machinery is generally run by it. So it's basal to absolutely everything, and that's why you hear so much about oil prices, Eddie.
Yeah. Well, but again, it's important because oil is something that has value to everybody. So a certificate that allows you to go to this storehouse and get out a barrel of oil, this is something that everybody will see value in. This is something that you can certainly trade if you want goods and services. Is there some risk to it? Of course there is. Maybe the company that owns the warehouse goes bankrupt and they don't redeem all of these certificates, but that's not the definition of money. The definition of money is something with perceived value. Doesn't mean there's no risk in it.
Yeah, the warehouse can burn down, and still you still got the IOUs. As long as people perceive it as valuable, you're good.
Exactly. Metallic coins have a fundamental value. Like gold is used in electronic circuits. Gold will always have some value, but even the value of gold in terms of real goods is going to fluctuate on the open market with supply and demand.
Okay.
Gold, there's nothing fancy about holding gold. If you hold gold in your pocket or in your safety deposit box, if the market decides gold is worth more or worth less, you're still going to lose value there. There's no completely passive medium out there. The various things that have been used as this commodity over the centuries or even millennia, grain. In Mesopotamia, we have examples of clay tokens that were used at grain warehouses to allow you to get a certain amount of grain out of it. Of course, if you grew grain, you could use the grain to trade for things yourself. You didn't need to have these tokens. In the Middle Ages, things like squirrel skins and peppers in Europe were used as a medium of exchange. In colonial America, you had things like beaver pelts, wampum, fish, corn. In the South, you had rice down in the Carolinas, and probably the most universally demanded commodity, tobacco, in Virginia.
Now, fun fact, we talk a little bit about perceived value and economic systems. When the Europeans were traders, as French traders, were trading with the indigenous population, they wanted more beaver skins to export to Europe. So they raised the price. They said, guys, look, we're going to give you twice as much stuff or 3 times as much stuff for your beaver skins. And then the natives start showing up with fewer beaver skins. And they asked them, why are you giving us less beaver skins? We're paying you more for them. And they looked and they said, well, we don't need as many beavers to get what we need now. So why, we don't have to hunt as long. It's great. So it goes to show you the Perceived value is not culturally universal.
Well, it also goes to show one other thing, that at the end of the day, it's not the amount of money in the system,
Yep.
it's the things you can buy with the money.
Yep.
The value is not the money itself. The value is not the US dollar or the Canadian dollar or anything else. It's ultimately the things that you can buy with them.
It's a ratio of the currency to the goods in the
Yep.
economy.
Yep. And again, going back to what I said, in business schools, they'll teach you it's the medium of exchange. You trade your labor or your goods for money, and the money just helps you get another good. I don't agree with this. The money itself is every bit as much of a good, because the value of the money can go up and go down.
Makes sense.
Something that has been fairly constant throughout time, though, is coins, whether it's the clay tokens from Mesopotamia that could be cashed in for grain at the granary, or more recently, coins that come out of the mint. Now, for most of history, if you had gold or silver, anybody could take gold or silver to the mint and have have the mint melt your gold down, turn it into coins, and that coin would be legal tender, at least within whichever country you were living in.
Now, fun fact: people would do that so that the mark of the government said, like, this government or this king has guaranteed that it's the right amount of silver or whatever in that coin.
Yep.
So that was the reason why. Okay, I got gold, but I want the government to now certify that this is the set amount of gold per curse. So that's why people were doing that. That's why you see the king's face on coins, or George Washington or whoever, because it's the sign. Okay, the government's vouched. This is worth something.
Now, the thing about using legal tender prices, though, is that if the government gets into a little bit of trouble and decides to put less silver or gold into the newer coins that they mint, a merchant has to accept a silver coin with 100 grams of silver or with 107 grams of silver, the older one. So what's going to happen? The old coins are going to be very, very quickly melted down, and they're going to be taken to the mint and turned into more coins with 100 grams. So the 107 gram coins are going to quickly disappear from circulation.
But then you're going to have a bunch more coins, and you have an increased production.
Yeah.
So what happens to that ratio I was talking about of goods to the currency?
You get $12 bottles of honey at the
I was gonna
at the supermarket.
Yep.
So this is an early example of something called Gresham's Law. I don't know if you've heard the expression "bad money chases out good money." This is exactly what it means. It means that if you have two things that the government make legal tender, again, if I'm charging a fixed price for something, and the legal tender laws say I have to accept either a 100-gram coin of silver or the 107-gram coin of silver. The 107-gram coins of silver are going to disappear from circulation. They're going to essentially be driven out by the 100-gram coins. This is something we see time and time again throughout history, and it's called Gresham's Law. It's just something that you cannot get around, and every time governments try to debase their currency or to fix their prices by using legal tender laws, it always happens. The valuable stuff, the stuff that's made from more valuable raw goods, just disappear from circulation. So I'm going to give some definitions here. Specie is the metal that has been minted into coins. After you've melted gold or silver down into a coin, legal tender laws say you need to be able to buy certain things with it, or anybody who you owe a debt to has to accept it. This is as opposed to bullion, which would be the price of the raw goods on the open market. So gold bullion, gold bars, the price of this is determined at the commodities exchange by supply and demand. Whereas when gold has been turned into a coin with the king's face stamped on it, if something says, if a price listed says one gold coin, legal tender laws would say that they have to accept it.
Doesn't do any good to show up with the amount of silver
Yeah.
or whatever.
Yeah. Now, there may be an arbitrage opportunity. Maybe you can melt it down, exchange it for something else, and pocket the difference. But still, when you have specie, it needs to be accepted as legal tender. And obviously, there's paper money, and we'll be talking a little bit more about paper money later on. But at least originally, there's a reason that an English banknote said £1 sterling on it. It's because you, at one point, could take this to the Bank of England and redeem it for £1 of sterling silver.
Spoilers. Not anymore, guys.
Yeah. Well, not just that. Modern currency is none of the things that I just mentioned, though. It's not specie, it's not bullion, and it's not a piece of paper that you can go and redeem for £1 of sterling silver. So is it literally just a piece of paper? Well, you talked about spoilers. When you understand what a modern dollar is, you'll wish it was just a piece of paper.
I want to clarify, in most countries, or at least in America, it is low-grade cotton, not paper. That's important for some. There's some Aspie out there, that's very important to them.
Well, just for the Aspies out there, there's a term called seigniorage. I wasn't even planning on going over this. It takes a few pennies to make a $100 bill, and the U.S. Mint sells this $100 bill to banks for $100. So that's how they make a lot of their profit. It's called seigniorage. It's literally the difference between the face value and the value of materials that go into the bills that are made.
Jesus Christ.
And this isn't even as deep as the rabbit hole goes, but
this is why Canada stopped making pennies.
This is exactly why Canada stopped making pennies. Value of the materials that went into a penny were more than 1 cent. So the mint was losing money on making a penny and selling it to a bank, essentially.
Okay.
So we seem to have reached a bit of an impasse, though. If the modern dollar is not specie bullion or a certificate that can be exchanged for a specific good, what is it? Well, we need to understand the banking system before we can answer that question.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, uh-oh, indeed. But just as we had to nail down our definition of what money is, we have to nail down our definition of what is a bank. Now, the classical, again, business school, MBA school picture of a bank is that it's a building where people put their deposits in. And for holding your deposits, the bank gives you a certain amount of interest. Then the bank will loan your deposits out to other people for a higher rate of interest. So say they give you 3% interest, they loan your money out to other people for 6% interest. Those people hopefully pay their money back with interest. The bank makes their profit that way. And when you come back to redeem your deposits or to withdraw your deposits, hopefully there will be enough in the vault at that given time.
But what if they just hand out a ton of mortgages to people who aren't ever going to be able to pay them back? What if they do that with your money?
We're going to do a future episode on 2008. Believe me, we're going to do a future episode on 2008, but there is far too much there to
Skip 2008, right?
That picture of just deposits coming in for interest and loans going out for a higher rate of interest, it's a nice picture, but that's just not how the modern bank works. But to understand what the modern bank is, we need to go back to what the original banks were and just see the progression, see how things have changed over the centuries. And two groups of people are very important. The first group of people are moneylenders. We really don't know how far back money lending went, but one thing we do know is we know that Babylon had some quite sophisticated mathematics. Like thousands of years before Pythagoras, they knew that a squared plus b squared equals c squared in a right triangle. We know they knew this from finding some of their clay tablets. Another thing we've found in some of their clay tablets is they were doing exponential calculations. And there is only one reason that people largely known for their business and their merchant prowess would be doing exponential calculations. It's because they were charging interest. But a money lender is somebody who had some capital and maybe took some deposits, but lent money to people and accepted interest. And some of them made a lot of money on it. Some of them gave large loans to churches and kings, and for whatever reason, that large client defaulted, and the moneylender would go bankrupt along with the client. The second group of people is the scriveners or the bookkeepers.
Okay, again, I see an ethnic stereotype.
Yeah,
This bookkeeper conjures to mind the very vivid image of, a bureaucrat with the glasses
Yes.
over an abacus.
Yes. Somebody who maybe sits alone in the back corner of an office. In fact, Herman Melville wrote a short story called Bartleby the Scrivener about a guy who never wanted to leave the office. It's an interesting classic piece of American literature, but let's not get sidetracked onto that. Well, okay, scriveners are people who were essentially the proto-secretaries, but who else was going to be the first bookkeepers, but people who knew how to write documents and write legal documents. Let's say I owe you three debts, one for $100, one for $150, and one for $125, but then you buy something for me from $200. We could settle all of these transactions individually, or we could all just call up our scrivener and say, okay, there's $100 debit, $150 debit, $125 debit, and a $200 credit. And the scrivener would just keep track of the fact that after all this, I owe you $175. There doesn't need to be any physical money changing hands as long as you have a good bookkeeper in charge. And of course, we'd probably have lawyers involved to make sure that the documents that the scrivener gives us are legal and can be defended in court. But the important point that I'm trying to make is that if you have a good system of bookkeepers, you can do a lot of commerce and you don't need to be physically changing. Forget gold and silver. We don't even need to be changing bills or IOUs or anything.
We
can
just
get a
gotta tell
bookkeeper.
Scrivener
Yeah, exactly.
what's up, and as long as he can keep the ledger straight. Okay.
Yep. This is especially important in our frontier town in the Wild West because we don't have to worry about stagecoaches being robbed. We can just keep the money in the vault and have people keeping track of it. And eventually, if we need to settle up, then we open the vault. But for the vast majority of transactions we're making, we don't need to risk Bonnie and Clyde coming along and stealing the gold.
This is why if I have a lot of cash in my pocket, that's a lot more vulnerable than my debit card.
Exactly.
Should be.
It's also why the money printer's not going burr, which to tie ourselves back into that. So let's say we have two local citizens. We'll call them A and B, or let's call them Alan and Bob. Those are two names that start with the letter A and the letter B. And Alan has agreed to buy Bob's farm for 300 pieces of gold. And let's say I'm just the bank manager in this small town. Alan comes to me and we draft a loan contract. So it's especially in those days, $300 was worth quite a bit. So I'm going to keep this contract in a safe place. But do I need to give him $300? No, I can give him a check, or I can give him a contract of exchange or contract of commerce. And say, whoever you give this to, you can come back to me and redeem $300. So I give Alan this piece of paper that says my bank is good to pay out $300. Alan gives this piece of paper to Bob to buy his farm, and Bob comes back to me the next day. He can either take $300 out of the bank, or I can say, why don't you just deposit the $300 with me? What just happened there? No money has come out of the vault. I gave Alan a piece of paper. Alan gave Bob this piece of paper. Bob gave me the piece of paper back, and yet property has changed hands, and for a significant amount of money.
The only thing that's changed is Buddy with the ledger at the bank, the Scrivener or whatever.
Yeah, so what is the point of going through all of this process?
We have to support the state of Israel. And I
Yes.
point of this process, I guess it streamlined, made sure we all go through less risk because we've got a vault.
Well, that's correct. That's part of it. But Alan, who took a loan from me, still owes me interest. But Bob, who gave me this piece of paper back, is now owed interest because he's put a deposit in my bank. So if my bank is going to be making money and surviving, Bob's rate of interest is going to be less than Alan's rate of interest. But we have allowed commerce to happen, and it's not a zero-sum game because these interest accounts are still out there.
Okay.
But no money had to leave my vault.
Okay.
So this whole idea of money deposits coming into the bank and loans coming out of the bank, even back then, it's just not what's happening. A lot of this is just numbers on ledgers, and a lot of the local economy can be supported with this. Now, of course, there's not 500 extra, sorry, there's not 300 extra dollars in my vault.
Yeah.
So if everybody who's given me their deposits and Bob want to withdraw all their money at the same time, then there can be a big issue here.
And that's
There can
what
be
you
a run on
call
the bank.
Run on the bank.
Yeah.
And-
Yeah.
Okay.
But nevertheless, I as long as we have a certain capital reserve in the bank, the risk is relatively low. The risk isn't zero. And by doing this, we've been able to stimulate the local economy. We've been able to stimulate local commerce. And I'm making money on this because I am collecting interest at a higher rate than I'm charging.
Okay.
Now, let me ask you another question. What if there are two banks in town? Let's say that instead of getting the loan from me, Alan gets the loan from my competition across Main Street. The bank gives him a check for $300. He gives this check to Bob, but Bob has an account with me, not with the other bank. So Bob brings me this check that is underwritten by the other bank. I'm under no obligation to accept this check. It's just like any other IOU, but even though the other guy's my competition, let's assume he still has good credit. I can probably still take the check, put $500 into the ledger into his bank account, and then at a future date, go across the road to the other bank, get $300 worth of gold and bring it back. There is some risk obviously involved in this because physical assets are being moved from one vault to the other. I really don't know what the equivalent of armor trucks were in that day, but in the modern day, you'd be using an armor truck. You'd be calling Brinks to get them to.
You got a buddy with the shotgun next to the
Yeah,
driver.
yeah.
I guess he would have been the equivalent.
It's the Wild West, right? In fact, there's a reason why we call it riding shotgun when you sit in the front seat of a car.
Yep.
But this is where the Scriveners come in, because what if me and the other bank, we mutually have a Scrivener who trusts us both? Well, we don't really have to settle this debt, at least not immediately, physically. We can just call our mutual Scrivener and he can move $300 from the other bank into my asset column, even though the $300 are still sitting physically in his vault. Once again, we've created an asset and a liability. We haven't done voodoo to create something out of nothing. The $300 are still in his vault, but he also has a negative $300 liability, which will be settled at some point. As cities and towns start to grow and we have more and more banks in the region, it is beneficial for us not to be complete competitors who want nothing to do with each other. It's beneficial for various banks to have certain agreements with each other.
Look, my kids went to your kids' bat mitzvah.
Yep.
They go to the same summer camp. They all go to the same weird private school. Let's work something out. I'm sick of paying these frickin' goyim to drag the gold back and forth.
Yep. In fact, the Scrivener's not going to be a goyim either in this case. So. Yeah, and if you have a Scrivener who wants to make a little bit of money, he can be a little bit creative when he keeps. So. As more and more banks pop up, it is mutually beneficial for us to do things like to accept each other's checks and to settle our outstanding accounts via a third party who keeps a trustworthy ledger. Because think about it, at some point, I'm probably going to have to write a check to somebody, and that person's going to be taking it to the bank across the road. So instead of having to settle up every transaction, we just do 100 transactions. Some are pluses, some are minuses. And if at the end of it, it nets out to, I don't know, $157, we just need to make one movement of $157 from one vault to the other. We don't have to do it with every single transaction. Ideally, the gold just sits in a vault and never has to change hands until the last minute. So, how did this develop? How did all of this develop? Why are banks like this? Well, we go back to the early 1500s in Venice. Like I said, we're going to be bouncing around a little bit historically and with the timeline. The Wild West was the mid 1800s. We're going to go back to the early 1500s. And at the time, Christians were not allowed to collect interest. The church was so opposed to it that if you charged somebody interest, the church would not give you a proper burial unless you made restitution to the church.
Fun fact, this is still how it works in the Islamic world.
Yep.
If you go to an Islamic bank, they will not give you interest. They will give you a monthly gift into your account. There's all kinds of ways. So that's why it's very, very hard for Sharia law places to run a modern economy. But anyway, so this is how Europe got around these problems.
Well, no, that's not quite how Europe got around these problems. Here's how Europe got around these problems. If the idea of a complex banking system doesn't work unless you charge interest, and Christians aren't allowed to charge interest, can you think of like a religious group in Europe that was known for being good with money that seemed to be in a bunch of cities at the time?
Okay, I'm going to guess it's not the Irish.
It's not the Irish, no.
Yeah. So.
And the thing is, the timing is important here when I say the early 1500s, because the Sephardim were kicked out of Spain in 1492. That was when the Reconquista happened, and they kicked out all the Muslims, and the King and Queen of Spain said, you know what, as long as we're cleaning house, you guys get the fuck out too. So a lot of these people ended up in various trading ports around the Mediterranean. A lot of them ended up in Morocco. A lot of them ended up in what's now Greece. A lot of them ended up in the Ottoman Empire.
Some ended up in India.
Exactly, yep. But the Mediterranean trade was important here because when you were trading goods in any port, you would inevitably be dealing with Jewish accountants and bookkeepers.
Yep.
And Venice, being a port town, was no exception. They had a big influx of Jews after they were all expelled from Spain. And one of Shakespeare's most famous plays was set in Venice, and the moneylender was named Shylock and was a Jew for a very specific reason. Shylock's experience was not, it was maybe a fault, it was maybe a fictional account, but it was also probably not that far off from what really happened in these days.
Well, no Jew would accept a pound of flesh as collateral. You can't. What can you do with a pound of flesh?
Well, so in The Merchant of Venice, Shylock says Antonio is a good man. Now, a good man does not mean a virtuous man. A good man is a man with good credit. But even though Antonio is a man with good credit, and Shylock is willing to give money to Antonio's friend, and Antonio still is a merchant with ships all over the place, and one of the ships sinks. This is like what I was saying earlier. Even if everything is completely above board, there still are natural risks in the world, and Shylock talks about the natural risk of dealing with merchants, and in the play, the natural risk comes about. At which point, Shylock says, well, you owe me a pound of flesh as the collateral that we agreed on, and the court stepped in and say, no, you can't do this. Well, you can have the pound of flesh, but
you are not entitled to one bit of blood.
Yeah, one bit of Christian blood.
So if you take his blood...
Yep. The moral of this story that may be a little bit more subtle here is that when finance depends on a lot of these agreements and credit, you need a court system to come in and arbitrate things. This is This is part of the story that a lot of people don't quite hear when when their teacher analyzes The Merchant of Venice in grade 11. Who am I kidding? We don't read Shakespeare in school anymore. But when we had a proper education.
Before it all got replaced with horrible shit written in the 90s, we used to read this something called Shakespeare, and it had life lessons
Yeah.
that weren't about how evil we are for being Westerners.
Yep. So, as I said, the moral is that finance doesn't just need trust, though it does need that in spades. It also needs a neutral arbitration system that everybody trusts to be able to settle disputes like this. This is another reason why in certain parts of the world they're just never going to be able to support a good financial system, because if certain counterparties, the court needs to take their side in certain matters, and those counterparties, such as like the king or the sultan or the sheikh, are involved in a lot of the local commerce. You can try to sue the king of some of these places, but good luck.
It doesn't work out the way you would like. You're not even really supposed to talk about them. Look at the king of Saudi Arabia is trying to build this ridiculous, long, thin city. And journalists talked about how the finances were not there for it, and he got cut up in the Turkish embassy, and they hacked him up. And so that's the kind of, anyway. So you can imagine.
I remember that happening. That happened a couple of years ago. So this is where our story starts to include a very famous name if you've studied any Renaissance history, and that name is Medici. The Medici were originally just a bunch of thugs in Venice. Well, the Kennedys were a bunch of rum runners. That's how they made the family fortune. The Medicis made their fortune as forex traders, or at least proto-forex traders.
What is a forex?
Foreign exchange. Forex.
Ah, okay. So they're money lenders.
Exactly. Well, they're money changers. I mean, I think, as I understand it, they literally had a table out in the town plaza or whatever they had in Venice, and they would they would exchange whatever the Venetian currency was for the Greek currency or whatever else you needed to do.
For nobody who remember, for all you post 2000s kids, once upon a time when you used physical currency, you went to another country, you would have to buy the local currency. You couldn't just debit it and whatever. So you have to go to the money changer and change your New Zealand bills for South African, rand or whatever. So anyway, those there.
Yeah, no, there are religious rules against usury, and it's looked down upon, but there are no religious rules against gouging people on exchange rates when you're trying to exchange money. To this day, if you've ever gone to Thomas Cook at the airport and you come back to Canada, the States, or Britain, or wherever you live, and you need to change your foreign money into the local currency, you're not getting all your money back, nowhere close to it. But anyways, one Medici became successful and legitimate, and he actually ended up relocating the family to Florence and started the local bank there. One of the things he did is he had a very diversified bank. It went, I think, from Avignon all the way down to Rome, and he was at less risk than some other money lenders who, as I said earlier, they would lend money to some king hoping to get a gigantic rate of interest on it. But if the king went bankrupt, or the king, for whatever reason, defaulted on his loan,
or he sent you a letter saying, not only am I not paying you back, but you're going to give me all the rest of your gold.
Yeah, stuff like that.
The king of Spain was known to anyway.
Yeah, one of the keys behind the Medici's success was that they didn't all have their eggs in one basket. If one of their counterparties defaulted, it didn't bankrupt the bank, and you probably had this guy's angry Italian retarded cousins on your ass.
This is one of the few instances where diversity really is a strength.
So the real innovation in the Medici Bank was what they called cambium per litteras, or I'm sure my Latin is terrible, but it's essentially checks. It's checks on the bank's account. Now, I said earlier that people have the idea that the proto bank was deposits come in and the bank lends it out. Going back to the Medicis, that wouldn't happen. The banks couldn't lend out money at interest. So, well, I guess they did a little bit, but
The Pope wasn't looking.
a couple of Medicis became popes.
That worked itself out, that problem.
It doesn't matter if there's rules against it when you can make a papal canon or call your cousin up to make a papal canon.
Yeah.
They made a lot of their money as in foreign exchange. You'd give the Medici some of your money, and they would make their profits by exchanging it in the foreign exchange markets. It's sometimes said that the Medicis invented double entry ledger accounting, which is what we've been talking about here, assets and liabilities. They really didn't invent it, and they also were not always, as religious about using it as they should have been. Maybe due to laziness, maybe because it was advantageous for them to have their have their bank books off in a couple of places. But anyways, the Medicis are known for double ledger accounting.
Like many Italians.
Yeah. Now, again, after a few major defaults, after a few years where the Forex business doesn't go as well as they would like it to, the Medici Bank starts getting in a little bit of trouble. So, as you do, you may raid the town funds. And the Medicis ended up getting expelled from Florence. When Savonarola has his famous bonfire of the vanities, one of the things he burns is a bunch of the Medici's books and their ledgers. Some of them did survive, but this really was almost seen as a cleansing ritual. Let's get these dirty Medicis out of Florence. Now, the Medicis did end up coming back because they needed. You need good bankers to have a healthy financial system, whether you like it or not. But anyways, this marked the last time that Italy was relevant in the business world. That's what I'm trying to say here.
They might cause or contribute to the European Union defaulting eventually.
Yeah. Well, this is the part of our story where we move from Italy to Northern Europe, which is where over the next 100 years or so, we have three major banking innovations that are still with us today. And this is where banks kind of start to look like modern banks. They kind of start to take the shape of modern banks. The first was in Amsterdam, and it's the currency exchange. I was saying earlier that you could take your gold or silver, your precious metals to the mint and have the mints turned into currencies. Well, in Amsterdam, I think there were something like 13 or 14 different mints in town.
It's a free market, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, yeah, I mean, yes, it may not be the most efficient way of doing things, but if there were all of these different minted coins out there and certain merchants only accepted some of them, you needed to be able to convert one currency to another, let alone foreign exchange stuff. So the currency exchange was a bank that just had a lot of all of these different currencies at once, and again,
a reserve, if you will.
A reserve, if you will, yes. And if you needed to change money from one currency to another or one mint's coins to another, again, this could be done with a ledger. If the currency exchange had everybody's money in their vault, then the same thing we keep talking about. No money needs to change hands. No money needs to come out of the vault. You just get the scriveners to move things from one column of the ledger to another. If you're noticing a pattern here where things are done with a ledger, this is important because every layer of financial innovation really comes down to this. Really comes down to people saying, hey, we don't need to physically exchange things. We just need to have a bunch of it in one place and somebody who can keep track of it. The second major financial innovation. It happens in two places roughly simultaneously. The first is in Stockholm, and the second is in Britain, and it's fractional reserve banking. This is another thing that every internet libertarian and conspiracy theorist loves to talk about is fractional reserve
I
banking.
was gonna say the first time I heard this was Alex Jones was ranting and raving about the fractional reserve. I think he had Ron Paul on the show or whatever.
Well, fractional reserve banking is not bad in and of itself. Combined with other things, it can be a problem, which again we will get to later on in this conversation.
It's like fire. It can keep you warm. It can burn your house down.
Yeah, that's a very good analogy.
Depends how you use it.
But I bet you that 9 out of 10 people who rant about fractional reserve banking couldn't explain what it is.
Oh, Alex Jones could not
Yes.
explain what it. I promise you.
So, as I said, it happened in Sweden and in Britain at the same time. I'm going to talk about Britain because we're English speakers and it's probably more relevant to our own history. Charles I, the king who eventually got his head cut off during the English Civil War, before that happened, he needed to finance this war effort. And he might have done so by taking a bunch of gold out of the mint.
When you have an army, you can get away with shit like that.
He did give the mint back, give the gold back to the mint eventually,
It was nice of him.
but
What?
but after this happened, people decided that maybe keeping my gold with the mint is not the safest place to do now that King Charles has proven that he's willing to take loans without consent.
So they trusted the experts, and that was not.
Yeah.
That turned out to not be the right thing to do. Go figure.
Yeah. Again, King Charles paid for a lot of things with his head.
That he did.
If you had gold and you don't trust the mint is a safe place anymore, the next best place is with the goldsmiths, the metal workers who make stuff out of gold. They have gold in their storehouses. So if you have to store gold, that's probably the safest place to keep it is with the local goldsmith. And as I said when we started, a lot of things that we would call money were certificates to be redeemed at the warehouse. This is absolutely no different. So you could think of these gold storehouses as proto banks, just like we had to determine that these IOUs really were money. I would say that these gold storehouses were banks because they take deposits and they let you withdraw your assets from them. And more importantly, though, they figured out we can loan out these gold bars and we don't have to keep all of the gold on hand. So if you give them, I don't know, 100 gold coins or whatever the equivalent in gold bullion is, it would probably be bullion, not coins. You give them 100, let's say 100 ounces of gold. If the goldsmith kept 10 ounces in there and loaned out 90 ounces of your gold, do you think that's a problem?
Depends if I need the gold.
Well,
right
exactly. It's a potential problem, but it's like there are runs on the bank. It's not, they don't always happen. But if I loan out 90 ounces of gold and that gold goes into goods that get bought and sold, and eventually over time, all of that gold, people come back to me with it and say, I want to store my gold in your warehouse as well. Well, we're now, I'm almost double counting the deposits because it's the same chunk of gold. They've just all come back to me. So after all the gold's come back, I still have 100 ounces of gold in my warehouse, but now there's 190 190 ounces worth of outstanding deposits, and I could loan that gold out again and get more deposits as it comes back, and I could load that gold out again and get more gold back in deposits. So if you do the math on this, as long as you keep the right percentage ratio, you can get up to you can get up to 1,000 ounces worth of deposits and only have 100 ounces of gold in the warehouse.
So it's like an insurance company.
Well-
like everyone might crash their car tomorrow.
Exactly. Well-
but it's unlikely.
Yes. If all these if everybody with the outstanding 1,000 ounces worth of deposits comes back at the same time, then it's a problem for me. But it's no different than any other business whose creditors, when they say you owe us money, if you can't pay it, they can start taking your assets. It's not necessarily anything different than that. But let me ask you this: if we just created 1,000 gold ounces out of 100 gold ounces?
No.
No, we haven't. We've created more asset liability pairs, exactly the same as everything we've talked about before. We still have 100 ounces worth of gold, and we have 900 ounces worth of asset liability pairs out there. These are debts that need to be settled, and in theory, even if there is a run on the bank, there's a run on the storehouse. If people try to cash out 120 ounces of gold, when the game of musical chairs ends, there's 20 people who are going to be needing their deposits, and I'm going to say I can only cover 100 ounces worth of it. I'm going to have to file for bankruptcy, but in the courts might say, okay, you are trying to claim 20 ounces of gold, and the bank has lent out gold to these various people, so maybe you can settle up your accounts with the other people who owe gold back to the bank. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So then you gotta then broker those liabilities or then or something.
So we haven't created something out of nothing. We've created a bunch of accounts payables and a bunch of accounts receivables. And if there is a run on the bank, it's a big problem, but it's still not the end of the world, because if you have a good court system, he still might be able to
check the ledger.
to check the ledger and just match up the accounts receivables with the accounts payables. You're probably not going to be able to recover everything, but you might be able to recover some of it. This is going back to what I was saying earlier, that finance depends on a court system. The small town on the frontier, that kind of depends on credit and everybody knowing everybody else, going to the same church, belonging to the same clubs, belonging to the same social organizations, and knowing that the town will beat the shit out of you if you default on your loans. But something like this that's a little bit more sophisticated, it's going to have to be arbitrated in the courts. But that doesn't mean it can't be. And it also doesn't mean that the banks are just doing a bunch of voodoo and conjuring up $900 out of nothing. We're still always going to be an asset matched with the liability every time this happens. But nevertheless, a lot of what this tells us is that for every one coin of specie there is, or for every 1 ounce of precious metal there's a lot more than one piece of paper out there corresponding to it. And a lot of the money that's out there in circulation is these checks on assets in the storehouse that might not be there at a given point in time.
Okay.
Keep in mind what I was saying earlier about M0 and M1, M0 being the fundamental asset and M1 being the credit accounts drawn on the original asset. This is nothing different than having $100 worth of M0 and $900 worth of M1 in the modern parlance.
All right. So now the money itself is now M0.
No, it's no different than before. The gold coins were still M0. The gold in the storehouse is still M0.
Okay, perfect.
It's the credit accounts or the asset liability pairs that are still at the end of the day denominated in gold that are the M1. But those certificates can still be perfectly traded with everybody else throughout the economy. And for most commerce, it's a lot easier to trade these certificates with people than it is to trade actual gold coins with them. And less dangerous as well.
For anyone that wants to see what a system looks like where you don't have a guy like this, when some of the states legalized marijuana, it wasn't legal in America at the federal level. So you have now states that run, have these successful marijuana dispensary businesses, but banks that won't touch that money because they don't want to get in trouble with the federal laws. Now, what finally happened is a bunch of Iraqi war vets and Afghan war vets created their own armored car service and their own like one of these gold depots, like you're basically. So they went around every day to the various dispensaries, gathered up the cash in their crazily armed Colorado car, and took it to their location and kept them up. So that's the kind of, you don't have to pay these guys. You don't have a bunch of war vets, that you got to pay to haul your cash around every day. That's not cheap. So this is just one other way of streamlining the system.
Well, this is what I was saying before. Most money throughout history has been a warehouse with some commoditized good in it and certificates on it.
People are going to maybe ask, well, why is this lending system at interest so freaking important? Let's go back to the extreme basics. I would like to say, have a great idea for a business. I'm going to make apple pies. I make the best apple pies in town. I have no money for a bakery. I've got to go to the bank, and if they like my idea, they give me some of this fractional reserve currency. I can then start my business that I couldn't start without that interest or without that loan, and start making money to pay the bank back. So you are now with these, if you don't have a good banking system, you now can't get money to people with good ideas to start businesses to create. So in that sense, you can, with this system, you actually are creating wealth.
Yeah, that's a perfect example, or at least it would be if the banks had gold in their vaults.
And if the people took the business loans and made working businesses, that's the other thing that's kind of breaking down.
I said that there were three major financial innovations when the center of commerce moved from Italy to Protestant Northern Europe. First was the currency exchange. The second was fractional reserve banking. The third was also in London. It was the Bank of England. The Bank of England establishes banknotes, i.e. what we call bills in North America.
The pound sterling?
Pound sterling, yes, but the pound sterling means something a certificate that can be traded for a certain amount of sterling silver. That's not the new part here. I mean, that's no different than the gold storehouses. The Bank of England establishes banknotes where both parties don't need to have an account. You do not need to have an account with the Bank of England or the Bank of Canada or the Federal Reserve in the States to be able to use money and to be able to take a bill to the Bank of England to cash it out for sterling silver if that's what you want.
Oh, fascinating. Okay.
So these are the three things that make banks start to look like they do today. Now, the Bank of England is the first proto-central bank. It doesn't do everything that the modern central bank does, but if banks don't want to have all of their assets in their own vault and would like to keep it in a place that is watched over by the government where the king will order your head to be cut off if anybody touches it, the Bank of England is a pretty good place to keep it.
And you have an independent court system that if you have a problem with the Bank of England, you can take them to court and not get killed. And freaking get your thing done. Now that's important because guess where the people with the capital are going to go, guys? They're going to go to places with good banking systems that are going to protect their assets. So that becomes very, very important.
So everything I've been saying so far seems logical, right?
Yeah, it's pretty.
I mean, the banks started as something simple, but one round of financial innovation after another has made things a little more abstract, a little less involving physical money, and a little more about doing things on ledgers. But it all sounds like a logical, common sense idea. You don't want any gold coming out of the vault if you don't need to. In fact, it seems like a lot of very intelligent people help to develop the financial and the banking system, right?
Yeah, that it does.
Well, this is where the story changes a little bit.
So we're going from boogie nights in the 70s where everybody's happy and doing blow to boogie nights in the 80s where people are, jerking off in parking lots and shooting their fucking wife or shooting themselves and because their wife was fucking people. And yeah, it's just very typical because now we're going to introduce our dear friends, the Americans.
Yes. Just as the Europeans knew how to develop a banking system that was orderly and can be dealt with uh, in a proper court system, the Americans had a very different approach to money.
The Americans, you're going to notice again and again, have a way of taking an idea and just pushing it to an extreme where it becomes absurd.
Yep.
And money is no different.
Yep. So we're going to start in colonial New England.
A lot of things start in colonial New
Yeah. Yep. You'll notice that not just in this podcast, but in future episodes. I'm sure we will as well. A lot of very interesting people fled Haverhill and ended up in Boston. In colonial times, legal tender was two things: silver and gold. Pound sterling was defined as a certain number of ounces of silver, and gold was a certain number of ounces of gold as well.
And this is why the Ron Paulites are always screaming about gold and silver, and why my crazy uncle has started burying gold coins on his farm. Okay, that makes sense.
Now, there is a problem when you have two metals that are both legal tender, because there's an implied fixed exchange rate between them.
And somebody can discover a new gold or silver mine and completely fuck that.
Exactly. Well, even more generally than that, the exchange rate or the implied exchange rate between gold and silver is not necessarily going to be the same as you get on the open market. If, like, for example, in the London Stock Exchange or the Vienna Stock Exchange or Amsterdam or wherever else they're trading commodities.
No, not Hong Kong anymore.
Don't quote me on the number, but I think that the fixed exchange rate was 15-1 between gold and silver. So if, for whatever reason, on the open market, the laws of supply and demand decided that there should be 17 silver pieces for every gold piece, but in the American colonies, by law, because it's legal tender, you need to be able to change 15 pieces of silver for one piece of gold, or equivalently, if you're pricing something in silver and in gold, the ratio has to be 15-1. Well, what's going to happen there is that you're going to go to the States, or some merchant is going to go to the States, buy as much gold as he can for 15 pieces of silver, take that gold back to Europe and sell them for 17 pieces of silver.
Called arbitrage.
It's called arbitrage, yes. But more importantly, it's another example of Gresham's law, which was what we were talking about, where bad money drives out good money. A lot of people throughout the years have tried to have two metals, or at least two legal tender standards, and just inevitably what's going to happen is that one of them is just going to disappear from circulation. Or one metal and a piece of paper. So, in the Age of Sail, all of the European empires were not just about commerce. A lot of it was about marauding and stealing things from each other.
Yeah.
It was just, par for the course. It was the way they do things in New England, that they would regularly send people into Quebec to plunder and steal things, as you do.
Yeah, exactly.
The people from Quebec never steal things from English-speaking places, do they? Poor Quebec was.
I'm sure not.
So usually when the New England marauders and plunderers would go into Quebec, the colonial governor would say, yeah, you can keep a portion of whatever you find. But one time, the French military caught them and said, you guys, get the fuck out. You're lucky we're not cutting your heads off. So they go back to the Massachusetts governor and say, well, it's just a risk of the job. We still did the work for you, and we still want to be paid. Now, this causes a problem because the Massachusetts government just doesn't have enough gold on hand to pay them.
Uh-oh.
Well, the real uh-oh is, you would think that, okay, the government can just borrow money and issue bonds. The problem is the Massachusetts government defaulted on a couple of debts up to that point, so nobody was willing to lend them money anymore.
As happens.
So they might have printed a few pieces of paper that said at some future date you can redeem these for gold.
Uh-oh. Well, there you go. Is this why they're always looking for the Golden City?
That's the Spanish, unfortunately.
Oh.
Yeah, the Americans realized you don't need a golden city when you just write pieces of paper.
You gotta just be Joseph Smith and tell people there's a Golden City.
There were two promises that were inherent in these pieces of paper. The first is that at a future date you'll be able to redeem this for gold, and the second is we absolutely promise that this is just a one-time thing. We will not print any more paper money in the future. Now, this is where everybody who grew up in the 90s like us will picture an episode of The Simpsons. Do you intend to honor those promises? Of course not. It was very, very quickly that it was realized that neither one of those promises were going to be honored, and they started printing more money for a future guarantee of gold, but no guarantee of gold right now. And it just became standard operating procedure in some of these colonies, not just in Massachusetts colony, but in some of the neighboring colonies as well. And the money starts to inflate because even though these pieces of paper say legal tender on them, even though by law, if I give you this piece of paper to settle one of my debts, you can't tell me, no, fuck you, I'd rather just have the gold instead. That's what these two magic words, legal tender, mean.
Oh, okay.
So what's going to happen here? Well, due to Gresham's law, bad money is going to chase out good money, and all of the gold and silver is going to leave the colonies. They didn't print an infinite amount of money, so there still needed to be some silver and gold in the colonies to make sure that there was enough in circulation to keep all of the commerce going. But then, being Americans, what do you think happened next?
It's either they started shooting each other, or they started printing way more money.
What happened next was because they got themselves into this mess by trying to plunder stuff out of Quebec, they told people, go plunder Quebec again and try to get more stuff, and they got caught again and printed out more money for this.
So they doubled down.
They doubled down, yes.
You're going to notice, guys, in history, a lot of Puritans doubling down on things. Yeah. That's going to be a theme. It didn't work, try it better. Yeah. Try it more.
So, yeah, they have to print out a whole bunch more money after another failed mission into Quebec, and this just drives out all of the rest of the hard currency, all the rest of the silver and gold. And not just that, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island were all printing out paper money at this point, and they all agreed to honor each other's paper money as legal tender. So even if you decided to stop printing money, if paper can start flooding in from the neighboring colonies, that's going to drive out the rest of your gold as well.
Yep.
So what do you think happens next?
I'm guessing there's going to be not a lot of gold in the colony.
There's almost no gold at this point. So what happens next? They try to invade Quebec again and fail a third time. So they have to print out even more money, and at this point, the British government steps in and says, no more printing money.
Now, for any Americans listening that like to rub it into the French about their military defeats, you remember this. So the king's got to now step in.
Yes.
King of England. Is this still King George, or is it? It would be funny if it's the same
I think it's a little earlier than that, but I don't know the exact date off the top of my head. But
so Americans who love being told what to do,
yes,
have now been told not to print any more money by the king.
Yeah, so they have to get back on the physical metal standard, and it does stabilize the economy for a little bit. The British have also told them that they can't mint money either. The money has to come from London, but it doesn't matter that much because in those days the Spanish Empire was the global hegemon, at least in the Western Hemisphere it was, and the Spanish pieces of eight, as they called them, the Spanish dollars were basically the de facto currency everywhere. So Spanish coins were used even in
Pre-greenback, greenback.
Yeah, exactly. Well, they weren't greenbacks because they actually were
Yeah, they were
silver.
something, but
In fact, if anything, the Spanish dollars were undervalued relative to everything else. So the Spanish dollars would start driving the local currency out of places, again, due to Gresham's law. At one point, even though they were told not to print money anymore, I think the Massachusetts government still tried to debase the local currency and say that, you have to accept so many British. You can price things at a discount in British pounds because we're hoping that will get more foreign commerce to come in and buy our local goods. But all that happened there was it just drives all the Spanish silver out.
Yep.
So yada yada yada. The Americans decide in 1776 that they want to declare their independence. And how do you think they financed this?
They printed money.
Yes, they did.
Of course.
They were called the Continental Dollar. I don't think there was a central source of Continentals, but it was every one of the states individually printed money to settle their debts.
Imagine if they could get away with that today. Oh God.
We're getting there. We're getting there. Yeah, there was an expression back in those days, not worth a continental, because these continental dollars were just pieces of paper to maybe at some point in the future be redeemed for silver and gold. But by the end of the Revolutionary War, nobody even thought that they were going to get anything real for these pieces of paper. And they kind of agreed, let's just let these things go out of circulation. They're going to be worthless. Let's just let this die and get onto a real currency again. Which was a good thing because can you imagine if they had decided to redeem these pieces of paper for silver and gold at their par value? They would have gone into just an incredible amount of debt from day one, just trying to redeem the currency, the promises behind their currency. Unfortunately, there were a bunch of loan certificates that were out there to finance the war effort as well, which is there really any practical difference between a piece of paper that says this will be worth gold at some point in the future and a loan certificate that says you're entitled to a certain amount of gold? They're just pieces of paper. But for one reason or another, I think he was the governor of Pennsylvania, but the governor of one of these northeastern states decided to insist that we are totally going to redeem these bonds for their face value. So the Americans from day one had to start with a centralized bank that was in a lot of debt.
So
How things change? No, they don't.
You learn as you study American history that the same things keep coming up over and over again, and so much of what you see today was right from the beginning. It was just baked into the DNA of this place. So.
Yep. Now, after the Andrew Jackson years, and there's a lot of interesting stuff there, but not for this conversation.
We're gonna have to do Andrew Jackson at some point.
Yes, we will. This is when a bunch of gold is found in California in the California Gold Rush. So even though the United States is officially on a bimetal system, in fact, the American Constitution says that gold and silver have to be legal tender, because a large source of gold is found, this is going to increase the supply, so it's going to, at least relatively speaking, devalue gold. But again, there's a fixed exchange rate between gold and silver. So what happens here? All of the silver leaves the country due to Gresham's law. This doesn't make that much of a difference in the short term, because what difference does it make if there's only one metal that can settle your debts versus if there's two of them until they find a bunch of silver mines in Nevada. But that's just hold that thought for a second, because a little thing happens in between, and that thing's called the Civil War.
Oh, good.
And how do the Northern Union states, how do you think they're going to finance the Civil War?
I'm going to guess that they printed a ton of money.
They printed a ton of money.
Of course.
These were called the greenbacks because they were not gold backed, they were not silver backed, they were just a piece of paper.
Just a piece of paper that was printed to fund war.
Yep.
Okay, just getting to where the greenback came. Okay.
So after the Civil War, a lot of these greenbacks were still in circulation. And some people in society liked having paper currency, and some people did not like having paper currency. One group of people who loved having paper currency, legal tender, are people who had a lot of debt. Because debt is essentially a number on a ledger. But if the currency inflates, you can sell off whatever assets you have for a larger number of pieces of green paper and then use them to settle your debts. Another group of people who support keeping the greenback are manufacturers. Because they have to compete with foreign manufacturers, and financial markets are a little bit more efficient than everyday commerce. If people who are foreign exchange traders know that the money is going to inflate, that's going to show up in devaluation in the foreign exchange markets a lot faster than the prices eventually do rise. So anybody who had the choice of buying a domestically manufactured good or a foreign good really got a discount with buying it with the local currency, as opposed to having to buy currency at an inflated price and import these goods. There was essentially an implied tariff by having greenbacks in place.
Okay.
But other than these specific special interest groups, the railroads who had a lot of debt from constructing their railroads, these manufacturers, some of these farmers who had debts. And, it was kind of a symbol of national pride for the Republican Party, because the Republican Party were the party of the Union. They were the party of Abraham Lincoln. Like, they viewed the greenback as a symbol of their victory. Does it matter that your savings are going to start depleting having this? Well, no, we'll deal with that later on.
That's an extra problem.
So for the next 30 or 40 years, one of the biggest political issues in the States actually was having the Republican Party, who wanted to have the greenback currency, and the Democratic Party, who wanted to have metal-backed currency or specie-backed currency. It seems almost quaint these days that this is one of the major differences between the parties in those days. Can you imagine hearing Donald Trump and Joe Biden having an argument on whether we should have gold-backed currency or paper-backed currency?
That would be...
I'd pay money for it, but I can't think either one of them has the mental capacity right now for that.
Nope.
It was to the point that in 1870, I had to write down the date here, the Supreme Court finally said that greenbacks are unconstitutional because they're taking people's money away from them, because the Democrats still had a 5-4 majority on the Supreme Court. Then 2 of these judges die, and Ulysses S. Grant, the Republican president, appoints 2 new judges, and what's the first thing they do is forget that. Greenbacks are totally constitutional. Like, this is the level of importance that this had.
You mean the Supreme Court was politicized?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, people think this is a new thing.
Just thank God they can't put it on TV.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is an interesting thing, though. There was actually, after they decided not to use the greenbacks anymore, there was a third party called the Greenback Party, which got 3 or 4% support. It's not an exaggeration to say that this was one of the central issues of American politics between the Civil War and World War I. Even though when people talk about American history, it seems like there's just a big gray zone between the end of the Civil War and the start of World War One. It seems like yada yada yada. We got into another war.
We noticed studying history that there are portions that are yada yada over. Part of this podcast, we're trying to explain the yada yadas.
Yep.
So.
Now, the railroad bubble bursts in the 1870s. And before the 1930s, the 1870s were known as the Great Depression. It was just that term got co-opted after the 1930s. And when the railroad bubble bursts, this is when the Democrats come to power on a hard currency platform. I think they take over both houses of Congress, and they finally get something passed called the Resumption Act, which means that I wrote down the year here, 1879, so 4 or 5 years after after this act was passed, the U.S. government has to start accepting greenbacks and give out money for this. What happens here, though? What happens is, because they know that this is going to happen 4 years down the road, they start writing a bunch of bonds in European markets so that they can start buying silver, so that they're going to be able to pay it out when the bill finally comes due. This is important because, as I said earlier, they'd found a whole bunch of silver mines in Nevada, and I don't know if there's any silver mines in Colorado, but I know that Denver, a lot of commerce done in Denver was done in silver. Unfortunately, though, the European markets had at this time decided to settle on using gold. So European markets decided to stop being silver and gold and just be pure gold. So the demand for silver completely drops at this point. So if the United States still kept silver and gold at the 15-to-1 ratio, this is very important. The people who still wanted silver to be used didn't want it to be used at market rates. They wanted it to be used at the 15-to-1 ratio that was used at the start of the country. So if the United States had gone back on the silver standard at this point, it would have driven all the gold out of the country by Gresham's law, because the demand for silver dropped outside of the States, which means that silver would have been relatively overvalued in the States, which means all the gold would have fled. I should say, like, at this point, all of the European economies decided to only be gold-based, and most places outside of Europe, like places in Latin America and in India and Southeast Asia, I think Japan was a notable exception, were still on silver. But as part of the Democrats coming to power, one of the things they do was say, nope, the demand for silver is about to collapse, so we're going to go single metalism. We're only going to put the country on a gold standard, not a silver standard. So after the country gives up on fighting about whether we should bring back the greenbacks, the country then proceeds to start fighting over whether we need to start bringing back silver at a 15-to-1 ratio. Again, it just seems so foreign to us now that major party politics and federal politics at the federal level in the United States was about what currency to accept. But this is what, for the last couple of decades, was one of the focal points in American politics, is whether we should bring back silver or not. And they do partially as a compromise to stop the what do they call it? The free silver movement, because there was, of course, a free silver movement. They agreed to let the U.S. Mint create a certain amount of silver coin every year, but not so much that it's going to completely drive out the gold.
Okay.
But the people who have the silver mines say, no, this is not good enough. We want as much silver as we want, and we want it at the same. We want it at the same exchange rate, where we get everything at a discount, but we want as much of it as possible.
So the utopian thinking.
Yeah. Well, again, there was a Greenback Party. Originally they got maybe 3 or 4%. Well, in, I think, the 1892 election, there's the People's Party, who was the same guy who ran on the Greenback Party, he runs on the platform of we're going to allow unlimited silver coins in the country, and he wins like 4 or 5 states. Again, this is not just a footnote. This is one of the central things in American politics at this specific point.
Can you imagine, like, economic policy actually being something the voter gives a shit about?
Yeah. Even though the free silver bill fails to pass Congress, just the fact that there's a threat of it happening causes all the gold to flee the country in the late 1800s. And this brings us into the progressive era, which we can talk about some other time. But the important thing is this was shortly before World War I. And World War I was so destructive to most of Europe that a lot of countries in Europe are forced to abandon their gold standards. Britain tries to get back on it after World War I, but it just really doesn't work all that well. And right before World War I is when the Americans introduced the Federal Reserve, which, in theory, there's nothing wrong with a Federal Reserve Bank. And if you read some of the stuff people were writing about it in the first place, they said all these regional banks, they're not run by people who are smart enough to prevent bank runs. So every bank in America needs to have some deposit in Washington on hand so that if a bank run is going to happen, we can just move things from one column of the ledger over to the other column of the ledger. Not a bad idea in and of itself, but it had to happen right before World War I, and when all of the civilized world said we need to go off the gold standard and let our currencies float.
We need to inflate our currency. We got to pay this out. We can't inflate gold. Let's.
So fast forward to World War II, which was even more of a disaster for Europe. The Americans told a bunch of their allies in Europe, it's probably dangerous having all your gold reserves on hand when your countries are getting literally bombed by these new things called airplanes. So they said, why don't you just ship all your gold over to America? We'll keep it safe in a place called Fort Knox in Kentucky. So at the end of World War II, don't worry, we'll give you your money back. We'll give you your gold back. We're just keeping it here for safekeeping. World War II ends, and they say, you know what? Instead of needing to give you your gold back, why don't we just start writing certificates on the gold that we have in Fort Knox? It's just as good as giving you your gold back, right? Giving you a bunch of these pieces of paper that allow you to redeem your gold at some future date. Don't worry about it.
And keep in mind, Europe is not in a great bargaining position at the moment. Mm-hmm. You got half of it being ruled by communists.
Yeah.
The whole thing is a smoking rubble. You've got half of half of the line being brutalized by Stalin. Mm-hmm. You've got the other half that they're trying now to that desperately needs money to rebuild. So the only economy that was still working at this point was the Americans. So if you wanted anything, it needed to be in greenbacks.
Yes, it did.
Because they were the only ones whose factories hadn't been completely destroyed.
Yep.
So Europe, it's not like Europe could really even do anything about that except the Marshall Plan and hope that the Americans protected them from communism is the long and short of that.
So this was called the Bretton Woods Agreement, where the Americans said the gold is still there, and the American dollar is still based on a certain number of ounces of gold, but we're just keeping it in Fort Knox in the same way that you British people kept your gold in the storehouses back then. It's nothing different than that. And by the way, if we borrow money from you, we're going to be paying you back in US dollars as well, by the way.
Yep.
Because we have debts too from this war, of course.
Yeah, the whole World War II was on the credit card, just so everybody knows.
So, Fort Knox is a very secretive place. They don't really let anybody in there. You were mentioning Ron Paul earlier. The whole time Ron Paul was in Congress, he said, can I go see the inside of Fort Knox to make sure we have all the gold that we say we do? And they constantly said, no.
No, not even, no.
In 1971, the French decide to call the Americans bluff. And well, maybe not even calling their bluff, but they just say, okay, you're really running up a whole bunch of debt. You seem to be running all these welfare programs that are very, very expensive.
And you have these weird foreign wars that we have to pay for that we don't understand.
Yep, that too. So we don't really trust your financial solvency. So we're just going to redeem these US dollars for the gold that you say is in Fort Knox. We don't want the pieces of green paper anymore. We want our gold back. And the Americans say, actually, these pieces of paper are not based on gold anymore. And this is the moment that every conspiracy theorist and pot-smoking libertarian loves to go on a rant about. Not completely incorrectly either.
So
Now,
a rare win for that camp, guys. You
Yeah.
guys enjoy this?
Yep. Well, in business school, they like to tell you that the Americans have never defaulted on their debts. I don't care what you call it. This is a default when you tell people we will give you as much gold as you want when you redeem it. And when they decide to redeem it, you say, here's these green pieces of paper. You say, well, what's the value on it? Well, if you need to buy something manufactured in the United States, and you will need to buy stuff manufactured in the United States, it needs to be redeemed in our legal tender, which are these pieces of paper.
And this is before China had stepped up in production. The Americans were the workshop of the world.
Yeah.
So
Now, one of the running themes I've been talking about in this last couple of hours is M0 versus M1. Been talking a lot about things like fractional reserve banking and drawing credit notes on banks and banks having a certain amount of gold in the vault. That hard currency that is still legal tender is called M0, and M1 are just assets and liabilities drawn that are enumerated by M0. But M0 is still something hard, something you can put in the vault. Now, if you've been paying attention and following everything I've been talking about, and I really hope you have, I hope I've simplified things enough. What is M0 in this story now that the Bretton Woods Agreement has fallen apart and the Americans have just said, we're going to give you these green pieces of paper?
I guess the only thing that would M1 would be the Americans' ability to manufacture goods that other countries want.
That's
it.
essentially, that's...
It's the goods in the economy that are now backing the.
Well,
because you got
yeah.
This is a ticket. This is now a coupon for the America store.
Exactly. I wouldn't say that is the M0, but that's the reason you would hold the M0. That's some of the value in the M0. The M0 is, again, just these green pieces of paper. But, and this is the other thread that I keep coming back to, remember how I talked about the Federal Reserve as just having a bunch of ledgers that if banks get into trouble, they can just move things from one column to another column or move this column back to the first column. If the Americans decide that now they want to print money, there's nothing backing it other than the American economy. Do they need to print money anymore?
As long as they're still manufacturing things that other countries want.
Well, what I'm saying, though, is do they need to go to the mint and say, we want to inject $1 billion into the American economy this year to get things circulating or to stimulate to stimulate commerce? Do they need to go to the mint and say print out $1 billion worth in these green pieces of paper? Or can they just go to their scrivener, their bookkeeper, and say, put an extra $1 billion on Goldman Sachs's asset column in this ledger?
It would just be a matter of manipulating the ledger.
So if, hypothetically speaking, there were a 2-year pandemic and the Americans decided to shut down their economy, not just the Americans, the whole world decides to shut down their economy, and say, look, we need to have a bunch of money in the system to compensate for everything being shut down. Would they need to make the money printer go burr if they want to, increase their money supply by a factor of 8, and that's their M0? And if there's a little bit of frustration in my voice, there should be. Do they need to increase their M0 by making the money printer go burr? Or can they just tell Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley and JP Morgan and Credit Suisse and Deutsche Bank and everybody else on Wall Street, here, your ledger has a few extra numbers on it?
No, that's how we paid for the pandemic.
That's how we paid for the pandemic. But not just that. The definition of M0 is either one of these pieces of paper or the number on this ledger at the Federal Reserve.
It's the ledger now.
The ledger is not just a way to keep track of money. That ledger is the definition of money now.
Jesus Christ.
That is the foundation that our economy is built.
I can see why this wouldn't be front and center information, given how important people's trust in a currency is. I'm going to talk a little bit about psychology for a second. One of the things that we think maybe distinguishes humanity from the other animals is we can play pretend together. We can all come together. This is what's sometimes called an intersubjective experience. So one example of that is, the classic example is religion. Intersubjective is there really is Allah really going to be upset if you draw a picture of Muhammad? No, but if there are 1 billion Muslims that are going to cut your head off if you do it, that's somewhat more real than it now has reality because so many people believe in it. Now, at the base level, at the human on human level, that's the same as money. If people have faith in it, if there's perceived value in it, they're willing to exchange it for stuff. If they don't have faith in it, they do what France did in the 70s and say, no, I think I want some gold. I want barrels of oil. I want microchips. I want whatever has real value. And that's when things get real fun.
Well, this makes things, the first question I asked, let's go right back to the first example about the frontier town and you needing to buy food for my general store and you giving me an IOU, and I asked, is this money? It's absolutely money, because there's some perceived value in it, and there's a lot more perceived value in that than there maybe should be in the current real legal tender currencies out there. Because, I trust your good name a lot more than I trust just some number in some ledger in a faraway city.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So the answer to the initial question is yes, that IOU is absolutely money.
And unfortunately, the answer to is the greenback money.
It's money. There's still perceived value in it. But hey, like I was talking about those IOUs might be worth zero. Even if I have complete faith and trust in you, you might get struck by lightning overnight, and it's still a piece of paper that might be zero.
Or let's say if my piece of paper that gives you, as a credit to the America store, what happens if America stops manufacturing things? What if other countries start becoming the manufacturing powerhouse of the world, or they control resources like oil?
So you have set me up for what I wanted to finish with. There's a lot of people use the word petrodollar without understanding exactly what it is. So that's how we're going to finish this, is we're going to explain what the petrodollar system is. Remember how I said earlier, I gave you that example about the guy with the cattle ranch and a gold mine in his backyard?
He's got the gold. He doesn't want any cap beef being traded in silver.
Yes. And when commerce is done in silver, in a very real sense, he loses real wealth. He can buy less stuff with his money. And when all of the commerce is done in gold, especially if this expands and even more people have demand for gold, he gets richer in a very real sense. Money is not a medium, and that's what I hope to get across with some of these stories. If all commerce for a certain industry is done in US dollars, there is now more value, at least in the short term, of a US dollar. And everybody who holds a US dollar gets richer in a very, very real sense.
Because if you want to play ball, you need whatever good is in there. Yep. And you can only get that good with the greenback.
You can only get that good with the greenback, and more importantly, if you trade oil and price it in US dollars, the American military won't invade your country.
Yeah.
There's another piece of value in the US dollar right now.
When we were young, it was said that we invaded Iraq because they had WMDs. Now, even at the time, anyone who really understood that knew Iraq did not have WMDs. They had been sold the WMDs by Americans. WMDs, or the kinds that were sold, have a limited shelf life. So the WMDs that they sold Saddam in the 80s, I believe, or whenever they sold it, that had expired by the time Colin Powell was at the UN talking about how this much anthrax will kill everybody in the world. So we're trying to figure out, why did the Americans actually go in to Iraq? Why did it happen? Why would they pick Iraq? Some people thought maybe Bush was angry. Bush Jr. was angry. They killed his dad. Some people thought they did it to back up Israel. Some people really thought, they were going to spread democracy, and it was, the axis of evil. As far as we can tell, the reason that they went in is Saddam was threatening to sell oil in euros.
He didn't threaten to sell oil in euros. He started selling oil in euros in the year 2000, and the invasion was in the year 2003.
It's really weird. Are there any other examples of this happening?
Yeah, Gaddafi said that maybe we should stop selling oil in US dollars shortly before a crowd shoved a poker up his ass in 2013.
And now it's important, two things, guys. You'll notice that the video of Gaddafi being sodomized with a bayonet is on the internet, and the video of Saddam being hanged is on the internet. Now, this was at a time when Saddam was hanged, where cell phones were not as ubiquitous. It was weird that video of him hanging ended up on the internet for everybody to see. So it's weird optically. Anyway, that's one thing I noticed going through that.
Yes, Saddam, at the end of the day, he decided to be that one asshole from the city who moved to the frontier town and started selling his cows in silver.
Yep, and that was that's what separates a North Korea that doesn't get invaded from an Iraq or a Libya that does get invaded or gets the regime toppled. Now, fun fact: there's one other guy who recently was talking about pricing oil differently. I can vouch for this happening. Basically, my dear friend that I do the podcast with called me up and said, "Oh, Putin's talking about pricing oil in rubles. I wonder if we're going to go to war with him." And then he invaded Ukraine. And we ended up at war with them pretty quickly. So it's very strange, something we noticed that just keeps happening.
Yeah.
And and this is interesting because we're in a situation now where the global economy, things aren't made in America. Your dollar to the America store right now doesn't buy a whole lot. The China store, the India store, the Saudi Arabia store, these are a little bit more important right now.
More important than they used to be.
Much more important than they used to be.
Yeah, I'd say the Americans are still the world hegemon, but they have people nipping at their heels now.
That they do. For example, right after the invasion of Ukraine, I went in to work with my father-in-law in our warehouse, and he goes, "Jeremy, did you hear what Modi said?" I go, "What do you mean?" And he goes, "No, Modi said not only will we buy Russian oil, but we will pay rubles for it. India will not be pushed around anymore." And that shows you that a guy like Modi with India can say, "Okay, we're going to sell oil and something different and start doing our own thing
and not be invaded,
and not necessarily be invaded." And we're wondering, looking back, if that won't be a Suez incident. If Modi's saying that, not, it just shows you the hegemony starting to go. So I'm going to maybe end this by asking our public, so what really backs the American dollar? You've got a bunch of, nothing is manufactured at the America store anymore. They can't really export resources in a way that's going to flood the economy, flood a market the way Saudi Arabia can with oil. Their intellectual property is going, even the Hollywood is no longer producing, is more worried about their China box office return than they are about their American box office return. And now maybe oil is not going to be priced in American dollars if Russia and some other countries get their way. So what does that mean for our global reserve currency? Well, I would say nothing good, my friends.
I would agree with that.
So yeah, guys, canned food, shotguns, maybe my crazy uncle burying gold on his property isn't as nutty as I thought. Sorry, Uncle Bill. And yeah, we're in interesting times. All right, that's going to be it for the podcast today. Hope you enjoyed it, and have a great week.